My parents gave my sister $4 million at the will reading. Then my senile grandpa stood up, exposed their lies, and made me the weapon of his revenge. Can you imagine believing your entire existence was built on a strong foundation, only to have everything shatter in a second, revealing a viper's nest of deception? That's what happened to me, Clara, when I discovered at the age of 33 that my own parents had covertly redirected $4 million of my family's fortune, which was intended for all of us children, to my younger sister Sophia. My breath caught. Sophia received $4 million. But before I could digest that gut punch, something absolutely extraordinary occurred. My grandfather William, who everyone assumed was bedridden and barely lucid, suddenly rose up from his wheelchair, his eyes piercing and clear, and spoke 7 words that froze the blood in my veins. I understand exactly what you've been doing. In that single shattering instant, I realized my entire childhood, and my entire idea of blood allegiance, had been based on a startling lie. This treachery did more than just change things. It destabilized our family dynamic in ways I'm still processing. If you've ever felt the sting, the deep sickening twist of familial betrayal, believe me, karma repaid them in the most unexpected and satisfying way. To fully realize the significance of that day in the library, you must first understand who we were. The Blake family. We weren't simply wealthy, we were Connecticut old money, the kind of privilege that is ingrained in you from centuries of financial stability. My parents, Edward and Margaret Blake, ruled over our family as benevolent dictators, often telling us how fortunate we were to be born into such wealth. There were 5 of us. My father, Edward, had a calculating mind that you could almost feel ticking behind his eyes. A Harvard MBA, of course. My mother, Margaret, was the ideal socialite, always managing our family's image with military precision. Then there was my brother, Liam, who was 4 years younger than me, and the designated family rebel who refused to deal with real estate. My sister Sophia, the baby of the family at 25, followed by me, Clara, the eldest at 32. Sophia stood out to me from the start. From the minute she was born, it was as if a spotlight was turned on her. My childhood photos, simple albums stuffed in the attic. Sophia's professional photographs dominate the main corridor. My birthday parties were always informal gatherings of a few pals. Sophia's events are elaborate, complete with petting zoos and skilled entertainers. This pattern, this obvious partiality, persisted as we grew older. Sophia has your father's business instinct, my mother would say with a knowing smile, even though Sophia had shown little interest in anything other than social media and shopping for years. Meanwhile, I was graduating summa cum laude, working hard in business classes in the hopes of joining Blake Real Estate Holdings, the company my grandfather William had started from scratch. Grandpa William was my sanctuary. He was the only person who genuinely saw me. While my parents were out attending Liam's rock band performances or swooning over Sophia's ballet recital, Grandpa William was my champion. He would sit in the front row for my debating competitions and business school speeches. He saw something in me that my parents were willing to overlook. He once told me, "You remind me of myself at your age," as we wandered the wide grounds of Lakeview Manor, our family house overlooking the Connecticut shoreline. "Clara, you have the drive to create something, rather than simply inherit it." Grandfather William's story was legendary. He began with a single rundown apartment building in the 1970s, and subsequently expanded to develop luxury buildings around New England. Blake Real Estate Holdings was worth well than $120 million when my father took over day-to-day operations 16 years ago. I worshipped him. While my father focused on preserving what had already been constructed, Grandpa William was a great visionary. He showed me that true riches was more than just accumulation. It was about producing value where none existed before. My parents' disdain of my business dreams became more obvious when I graduated from Morton. Despite my exceptional qualifications, my father assigned me to a modest role overseeing a tiny division of rental properties, rather than the development position I had planned for. He'd say to me, patronizingly, that property management would be a terrific experience. Development necessitates a specific instinct that cannot be taught in school. The stark raw irony of it all made my blood boil, because Sophia, who had barely scraped by in her business classes at a public university, was instantly given a vice president title and direct access to development projects after graduation. The bias was as clear as if it had been spray-painted on a billboard. In my late 20s, Michael, my current husband, entered my life. He was an exceptional high school English teacher who was grounded and passionate about literature. He saw through the Blake family's nonsense like it was glass. "They're preparing Sophia for something," he noticed after our third family supper. "And they're purposefully ignoring you, Clara." I initially defended my parents, making excuses and claiming Sophia needed more help, or that they saw something in her that I didn't see. But deep down, I knew Michael was correct. The question was, why? Why would my parents openly favor their youngest child when I had done everything perfectly? My parents' reaction to Michael's proposal was tepid, at best, pathetic even. My mother planned a simple engagement dinner at the country club. Nothing like the lavish affair I imagined would have been planned if Sophia had been engaged to someone from their social group. "Clara, are you truly a teacher?" my mother had whispered to my father loudly enough for me to hear. She could have chosen either the Ashton boy or the winter air. Michael and I married nevertheless, purchasing a small colonial home 30 minutes from Lakeview Manor. I continued to work for the family business, attempting to establish my worth despite my parents' imaginary glass ceiling. Meanwhile, Sophia moved from department to department throughout the corporation, showering praise on even the most basic successes. Of course, my triumphs were met with the expected reaction. Liam, for his part, had no desire to get involved in real estate. He followed music with a zeal that both angered and relieved our parents, irritated because it wasn't the path they had envisioned for their son, and relieved because it meant he wasn't competing for control of the family enterprise. That conflict appeared to be completely between Sophia and myself, even though the playing ground was far from level. Grandpa William was by my side throughout it all. He would invite me to lunch on a regular basis, asking pointed questions about the firm and nodding in agreement with my observations. As I approached my 31st birthday, I began to hope that when it came time for the next leadership transfer, Grandpa's influence would tilt the scales in my favor, despite my parents' evident preference for Sophia. Little did I realize that a much more complicated game was being played behind the scenes, one that would eventually reveal the rotten core at the heart of the Blake family riches. 2 years before everything burst, Grandpa William began to deteriorate. First it was subtle, forgetting names, misplacing his reading glasses, and delivering the same narrative twice in one afternoon. No one was really concerned, given his age of 85. Age catches up with everyone, right? But by the following spring, his decline had advanced significantly. He relocated from his wing of Lakeview Manor to a suite specifically prepared with medical equipment. A full-time nurse was hired, and family visits became scheduled rather than random drop-ins. Despite my increasingly rigorous work schedule, I made time to see Grandpa William at least twice a week. I'd bring fresh flowers to his room and sit beside his bed, updating him on the business, despite my parents' insistence that he couldn't follow sophisticated conversations. "He finds comfort in your voice," my mother would remark dismissively. "But don't bother him with business matters. Dr. Reynolds says stress can worsen his condition." But there were occasions during those visits when I thought Grandpa was more coherent than everyone stated. When I discussed specific properties or bargains, his eyes would just sharpen like a laser beam, and he would occasionally ask shockingly detailed questions before returning to meaningless pleasantries. I mentioned these moments to my father once, and he dismissed them as sundowning, which is a transient time of clarity frequent in dementia patients. As Grandpa's health appeared to worsen, I saw substantial changes in the family business. My father began restructuring departments, reassigning loyal staff, and hiring new executives from outside the company, which the Blakes had rarely done. When I questioned these actions during management meetings, I was told that they were planning for the future and that Grandpa William had approved the adjustments. More alarming were the closed-door discussions between my dad and Stephen Hale, the family's longtime attorney. 3 times I arrived at Lakeview Manor to see Grandpa, only to discover Hale leaving the study with folders of paperwork. When I asked my mother about these talks, she vaguely mentioned estate preparation and a peaceful transition. Sophia exhibited a great interest in the family business about this time, almost as if a switch had been flipped. After years of viewing her VP status as little more than an excuse for a corner office and a company credit card, she began attending all meetings, taking notes, and spending time with the financial officers. The shift was abrupt, a total of 190. "I've realized how important Grandpa's legacy is," she told me over lunch one day, her voice full of phony earnestness. "Dad's been mentoring me privately, and he says I have a natural talent for the big picture." I tried to raise my concerns with Liam during one of his infrequent visits home from Los Angeles, where he was attempting to get his band signed to a major label. "Something feels off about all of this," I murmured as we enjoyed a bottle of wine on my home's balcony. "Dad's making major company changes without proper consultation. Sophia's suddenly acting like she's in waiting, and they're limiting access to Grandpa William." Liam just shrugged, twirling his wine glass. "You're being paranoid, Mandy. Dad's always been a control freak, and Sophia's just trying to impress them as usual." As for Grandpa, he's old and sick. It sucks, but it's not some conspiracy. However, my suspicions grew, especially after I unintentionally uncovered documents in my father's office while looking for quarterly reports. I hadn't intended to snoop, I swear. But then I saw it. A folder on his desk screamed, "Succession Planning, Confidential." Inside there are drafts of documents that immediately transfer significant assets from Grandpa William's personal holdings to Sophia, circumventing Liam and me. When my father discovered me looking at the paperwork, his face reddened with rage. "Those are private family matters, Clara," he snarled, yanking the folder from my grasp. "Private family matters that apparently don't include me," I answered, my voice shakier than I intended. "Your grandfather and I have made decisions based on what's best for the company's future," he remarked with a laugh. "Not everyone has the right temperament for wealth management." The conversation stopped there, but the hostility between us intensified over the following months. I started documenting everything I noticed: changes in company structure, strange financial moves, and the timing of my parents' meetings with Hale. Michael thought I was becoming obsessive, but something in my gut told me this wasn't right. The last Christmas before the will reading was especially unusual. We gathered at a Lakeview Manor as usual, with Grandpa William escorted downstairs for the ceremonial present exchange. He appeared unusually fuzzy that evening, barely recognizing Liam, and repeatedly calling Sophia by my name. But, when everyone else was eating dessert, I swear I observed him staring at my father with a look that was everything but confused. It looked like a computation. As we were leaving that night, Sophia approached me with faux sisterly warmth. "You should really start thinking about your future beyond Blake Holdings," she urged, clutching my arm. "You and Michael could move anywhere with your business degree. Haven't you ever wanted to try something completely different?" The warning could not have been more plain if she had spelled it out. They were going to push me out, and they wanted me to leave gently. They had no idea that the reading of Grandpa William's will would upend all of their well-planned events in ways neither of us could have predicted. The day of Grandpa William's will reading began bright and clear, like a beautiful autumn morning that would ordinarily brighten my emotions. Michael clasped my hand reassuringly as we drove through Lakeview Manor's imposing gates. Neither of us expressed our anxiety that today would officially signify my exile from the family business, and potentially from the family riches entirely. "Whatever happens," Michael remarked as we parked next to my father's Bentley, "we have each other, and we have a good life regardless of what your parents decide." The huge library at Lakeview Manor was always my favorite room in the home. 2 levels of leather-bound books, a big stone fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows with lake views produced a timeless elegance. Today, though, the place felt like a pressure cooker. My father stood by the fireplace, dressed imperially in a tailored charcoal suit. My mother sat on a leather wingback chair, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed and her look appropriately melancholy. Sophia sat nearby, clothed in an exquisite black gown that appeared to convey grief. Despite the fact that Grandpa William was very much alive, albeit ailing, Grandpa himself was present, which shocked me. His nurse wheeled him in, and he sat slumped in a customized wheelchair, a checkered blanket covering his knees. Despite the warmth in the room, his previously imposing presence had faded so dramatically that it made my heart ache. He didn't appear to understand the significance of the meeting. Liam arrived last, looking uneasy in a suit that didn't match his musician's build. He hugged me briefly before taking a seat as far away from our parents as the seating arrangement permitted. Stephen Hale cleared his throat, then adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Thank you all for gathering today. As you know, William has decided, given his health situation, to execute certain aspects of his estate plan now rather than waiting. He believes this will ensure a smoother transition and allow him to see his wishes fulfilled during his lifetime." Hale started reading over usual legal provisions like executive appointments, tax concerns, and charitable bequests to William's favored charities. I listened closely, anticipating the details that would affect the family business. "Regarding Blake Real Estate Holdings," Hale went on, "William has already transferred operational control to Edward, as you all know. However, ownership shares were to be distributed upon William's passing according to the following percentages: 55% to Edward, 15% to Clara, 15% to Liam, and 15% to Sophia." My heart lifted slightly as I heard the word "were." Grandpa had originally intended for us to share equally in the business. "However," Hale replied, adjusting his glasses again, which felt like a physical blow. "As part of William's revised estate plan executed 3 months ago, when he transferred power of attorney to Edward, a significant distribution has already taken place." Hale removed a document from his portfolio. William has gifted Sophia Blake $4 million in liquid assets and real estate holdings, including the Westbrook development, the Sheffield apartment complex, and the Newport vacation property. The room began to swirl slightly. These were not just assets. Those were the identical properties I'd been managing for the past 5 years, and they were intended to be distributed among all the grandchildren. And the Westbrook development was not even finished yet. It was the project I had put my heart and soul into, researching environmental impact, collaborating with local politicians, and building a mixed-use community that would offer both luxury and cheap housing. These assets, Hale went on, have been removed from the estate distribution and are now solely owned by Sophia Blake. That's not possible, I murmured, my voice far away in my own ears. Those properties were specifically mentioned in Grandpa's original estate plan as being divided among all of us. My father took a step forward, his countenance a practiced blend of pity and frigid determination. Clara, your grandfather and I discussed this at length. The reality is that Sophia has demonstrated exceptional business acumen over the past year. Furthermore, with you and Michael both having established careers and Liam pursuing his music, Sophia simply has greater financial needs at this stage. Greater financial needs? Liam repeated incredulously, finally joining the conversation. She lives in a company-paid penthouse and has never worked a day in her life outside the cushy job you gave her. Sophia's face reddened with rage. That's not fair. I've been working closely with Dad on major projects. Just because I don't broadcast every little accomplishment like Clara doesn't mean I haven't earned this. Earned. I couldn't stop laughing, even though there was no humor in it. It was a sour and hollow sound. Sophia, you couldn't even explain how a cap rate works last year, and suddenly you've earned $5 million in assets? My mother interfered, her voice bearing the warning tone I had heard throughout my upbringing. Clara, this is exactly the kind of reaction that concerned your grandfather. This competitiveness, this inability to be happy for your sister's success. Success? I stood up, blood pumping through my ears. What success? What has she actually accomplished besides being your favorite? Hale clumsily shuffled his papers. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. No, I said, stepping to his desk. I want to see the transfer documents now. After a brief pause and a nod from my father, Hale handed me the documents. There it was, in black and white. My father's signature as power of attorney authorizes the transfer of assets intended for all of us to Sophia alone. The date on the certificate corresponded to a period when Grandpa William's health was said to have deteriorated significantly. This is wrong, I remarked quietly as I scanned the pages. Grandpa would never have wanted this. He believed in fairness. People change their minds, Clara, my father responded easily. Especially when they see who truly values the family legacy versus who might be distracted by outside interests. He cast a meaningful glance at Michael. The injustice of it all. Years of hard work have been discarded. My loyalty to the company is viewed as a pastime. Assets I successfully transferred to my sister, who had exhibited little interest until lately. It was overwhelming. I felt tears threatening, but I fought them back. I would not offer them satisfaction. And that is when it happened. From his wheelchair in the corner, Grandpa William carefully slid the blanket off his knees. He climbed to his feet with struggle but remarkable composure. His nurse gasped and approached him, but he waved her away with a forceful palm. That's enough, he said, his voice firmer and crisper than I'd heard in more than a year. The room went silent. My father's face had lost its color. Dad, you shouldn't be exerting yourself, he added hurriedly. Let's get you back to your room where you can rest. Grandpa William fixed my father with a look that might have frozen fire. I've been watching you all very carefully. The will you just heard? It's a fake. The hush that ensued was absolute. My mother's hand raced to her pearl necklace, an anxious habit she had developed since childhood. Sophia looked like she was about to swoon. My father stood motionless, like a predator attempting to evade detection. Mr. Blake, Hale said cautiously. I assure you, these are the documents you signed. When I was supposedly suffering from dementia, Grandpa William interjected, his voice growing stronger with each word. When I supposedly couldn't make decisions for myself. Edward, did you really think I wouldn't find out what you've been doing? My father began to speak, but Grandfather William raised his hand. Save it. I have proof of everything. The embezzlement, the falsified accounting, the offshore accounts, every last dirty deal you've made behind my back for the past decade. He reached into his jacket pocket and brought out a small silver thumb drive, holding it up like a trophy. "It's all here, and Judge Franklin has another copy in his safe. One phone call from me, and it all goes to the district attorney." My reality was both disintegrating and reconstructing itself. Grandpa William, my Grandpa William, had been testing us all along, and my parents had failed miserably. The library burst in turmoil. My mother burst into tears, and my father tried to approach Grandpa William but was stopped in his tracks by a stern glance. Sophia sat frozen, her perfectly made-up face an expression of disbelief. Liam walked to stand next me, our shoulders brushing in a quiet show of support that we hadn't experienced since childhood. "Everyone sit down," Grandpa William ordered, and everyone complied. Even my father, who had been directing our family and business with an iron hand, slumped into the nearest chair like a chastised kid. "I'll start from the beginning," Grandpa remarked, moving with surprising quickness to take a seat at the head of the long library table, his usual spot for family meetings. 14 months ago, I began noticing irregularities in the quarterly financial reports. Properties that should have been generating substantial income were showing minimal returns. Development costs for new projects were inexplicably inflated. Money was moving through our accounts in patterns that made no sense for legitimate business. He glanced straight at my father. "At first I thought you were simply making poor decisions. But Harris Franklin, you remember my old friend who became a judge? He suggested something more concerning might be happening." My father's visage had changed from pale to ashen. Judge Franklin, Grandpa's buddy for over 50 years, was well known for his expertise in financial crimes. "Harris put me in touch with a forensic accountant and a private investigator," he said. "What they uncovered was far worse than I imagined. Edward, you've been systematically draining assets from Blake Holdings for at least 8 years, millions siphoned into shell companies and offshore accounts under various aliases." My mother discovered her voice, which shook with emotion or calculation, it was difficult to know which. "William, you're confused. Edward has grown the company's official value, the annual reports clearly show." "The annual reports show exactly what Edward wanted them to show," Grandpa interrupted her. "The real numbers tell a different story. We should be worth nearly twice what we are on paper." He turned to face Hale, who appeared deeply uncomfortable. "Stephen, I'm disappointed in you. You had to have suspected something wasn't right with those documents I supposedly signed." Hale gulped hard. "Mr. Blake, I was assured you were having lucid periods when major decisions were made, given your medical reports. Medical reports that were exaggerated by specialists who mysteriously received large donations to their research foundations from anonymous sources," Grandpa said with a chuckle. "Those medical reports." My mind was racing, connecting dots that had been drifting apart for years. Limited access to Grandpa, new doctors, and abrupt changes in company structure. "You've been pretending all this time?" I inquired, still unable to connect the smart, strategic man before me with the foggy, confused grandfather I'd been seeing. Grandpa's attitude softened as he glanced at me. "Not entirely pretending, Clara. I am 84. I do have some cognitive challenges, but nothing like what they've led everyone to believe." He smiled slightly. "I've been careful to appear more impaired when certain people were watching." He turned back to face my father. "I needed to know how far you would go. Would you stop at cooking the books, or would you try to manipulate my final wishes too? So, I created the perfect test. I pretended to decline more rapidly. I allowed you to think you had control." My father eventually spoke, his businessman's demeanor largely restored. "Dad, this is ridiculous. I've made some aggressive tax maneuvers, certainly, but nothing illegal. As for the will, you and I discussed the changes. You agreed." Sophia showed promise. "Edward, stop." Grandpa's voice was calm but sharp. "The game is over. My investigator has documented transfers totaling $27 million to accounts that ultimately trace back to you and Margaret, not to the company, not to family trusts, to your personal control." He nodded to his nurse, who left the room shortly before returning with a dignified older guy whom I did not recognize. "This is Robert Donovan, former FBI financial crime specialist. He's been building the case for nearly a year." Donovan nodded professionally. "We have transaction records, communication logs, and testimony from 3 former employees who were pressured to falsify documents. The evidence is conclusive." The indoor temperature appeared to decrease 10 degrees. It wasn't simply family drama anymore. This could be considered criminal activity. Sophia quickly burst into tears. When things didn't go her way, she burst into ugly, gasping sobbing, rather than the measured, beautiful tears she was known for. "I didn't know," she cried, mascara running down her cheeks. "I mean, I knew something wasn't right with some of the paperwork Dad had me sign, but he said it was just tax optimization." Grandpa William regarded her calmly. "You knew enough, Sophia. Those tax forms you signed authorized the transfer of assets out of the country. Your signature is on documents creating shell companies in the Caymans." "She was just doing what I told her," my father said forcefully. "Leave her out of this, just like you left Clara out," Grandpa replied. "The only person who actually showed genuine business acumen and ethical judgment. The one you deliberately sidelined because she might have noticed what you were doing." Hearing Grandpa's validation, confirmation that I hadn't dreamed the years of being disregarded and undermined, released a tightness in my chest. Michael reached for my hand beneath the table. "The will you heard today is completely fabricated," Grandpa explained. "My actual estate plan is quite different, and it remains unchanged from what I decided 5 years ago." He motioned to Donovan, who produced another folder of documents. "Blake Holdings will be placed in a family trust," Grandpa stated. "Clara will serve as primary trustee, with Liam as secondary trustee. Operational decisions will require approval from both trustees. Edward and Margaret, you are removed from all leadership positions effective immediately." My folks were astonished and stared silently. My father's analytical mind was clearly racing, hunting for an opening, an escape route. "You can't do this," he finally stated. "You legally transferred power of attorney to me. These new documents won't stand up in court. Power of attorney obtained through fraud and misrepresentation of my mental capacity," Grandpa said with a wan smile. "Judge Franklin has already reviewed the evidence. The medical assessment I underwent last week, without your knowledge, confirms I am fully competent to make these decisions." He turned to face me and Liam. "There's one more thing you should know, and it could be the most difficult truth of all." He took a big breath. "Edward is not my biological son." The hush after Grandpa William's pronouncement was deafening. My father sat quite still, his expression unreadable. My mother turned aside, studying her manicured nails as if they held the mysteries of the cosmos. "What are you talking about?" Liam inquired, his voice strangely subdued. Grandpa William's look reflected decades of suppressed grief. "Your grandmother, Catherine, and I had been married for 3 years without conceiving a child. We were going through testing to determine the cause when she suddenly announced she was pregnant. I was overjoyed, never questioning the timing." His eyes widened as he remembered. "It was only after Catherine died of cancer, when Edward was 17, that I found her journals. She had had a brief affair with my business partner, Victor Langley. Edward was the result." My father's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. "I made the decision to keep this knowledge to myself," Grandpa said. "Edward had already lost his mother. I couldn't bear to tell him I wasn't his biological father, especially since I had raised him and loved him as my own from the moment he was born." "If you loved him so much," my mother sharply interposed, "why reveal this painful secret now in front of everyone?" Grandfather's eyes hardened. "Because Edward has used preserving the Blake family legacy as justification for every manipulative, underhanded action he's taken. He's wielded the Blake name like a weapon against his own children, favoring one over the others based on who he could more easily control." He directed his gaze toward my dad. "But the truth is, you've never understood what the Blake legacy truly means, because you've never had to build anything yourself." My father eventually spoke, his voice dead quiet. "So this is your revenge? Announcing that I'm a bastard and cutting me out of the company I've run for 15 years. "This isn't vengeance, Edward. It's accountability," Grandpa explained. "And I'm not cutting you out entirely. You and Margaret will retain 15% ownership in the trust, providing income but no management authority. The company will be led by Clara and Liam, with my guidance for as long as I'm able to provide it." "And Sophia?" my mother inquired bluntly. "Sophia will retain 10% ownership and her current role for a probationary period. Her future in the company will depend on her choices moving forward." Sophia dried her tears and looked uncertainly at our parents and Grandpa William. "This is absurd," my father exclaimed, standing abruptly. "I'll contest this in court. I'll expose your mental decline." "Please do," Grandpa said quietly. "And I'll ensure the district attorney receives the complete file on your financial crimes. How do you think the Westbrook investors will react when they learn their money was partially diverted to your personal accounts in Grand Cayman?" The menace hovered in the air, its implications clear. My father, probably for the first time in his adult life, had no response. "We're going home to discuss our options," my mother said, clutching her purse with shaky hands. "Sophia, come with us." Sophia paused, looking between our parents and grandfather William. "Sophia," my mother said angrily. After a little pause, Sophia followed our parents out of the room. The massive library door closed behind them, making a sound like to the period at the conclusion of a lengthy phrase. The supper that evening was probably the most agonizing event of my life. Grandpa William insisted that we all stay at Lakeview Manor to start the transfer process, as he termed it. My parents and Sophia arrived last in the dining room, after presumably spending the afternoon in serious private conversation. The big oak table, which could comfortably seat 24 people, now felt too large for our little gathering and too restrictive to contain the tension between us. We ate in near silence, the only sounds being the clink of silverware against beautiful porcelain and the odd whispered instruction to pass the salt and wine. Liam kept giving me inquisitive looks across the table, clearly as uncomfortable as I was. After the main dish was over, Grandpa William spoke. "Tomorrow morning we'll meet with the board to announce the leadership changes. Clara, I'd like you to prepare a brief statement about your vision for the company moving forward." My father's knife clattered on his dessert plate. "This is still precipitous, Dad. The board has worked with me for years. They won't simply accept Clara stepping in without question." "They will," Grandpa said calmly, "when they understand the alternative is a public scandal and potential criminal charges. Most of them have their own investments tied up in Blake Holdings. They'll choose stability and discretion." Later that evening, Liam discovered me in the garden gazebo, where I had fled to contact Michael and analyze the day's events. He sat alongside me on the cushioned seat, gazing up at the stars that shone through the gazebo's glass ceiling. "So," he remarked after a time, "apparently, we're business partners now." I chuckled, a genuine laugh that felt out of place given the happenings of the day. "Apparently. I know nothing about real estate development," he replied. "You know more than you think, and you have good instincts about people, which is half the battle." I tilted my head toward him. "Are you okay with all of this? You've always been clear about wanting your own path." Liam was silent for a moment. "I think I'm actually relieved. Music will always be my passion, but I've been struggling in LA. Too many talented people, not enough opportunities." He cracked a grin. "Maybe this is the universe telling me it's time for a different approach. I can still make music while helping with the family business." Co-trustees, huh? Grandpa was smart to structure it that way. Neither of us can make major decisions alone. "Checks and balances," Liam concurred. "Something our parents never allowed." The next morning, Grandpa William asked me to his secret study, which I hadn't been allowed to attend for months. Unlike the towering library, this room was intimate and personal, with aged leather chairs and walls adorned with family portraits rather than leather-bound legal tomes. He unlocked an antique cabinet and took out a faded photo album I had never seen before. As we sat together on his small sofa, he began showing me photos from Blake Holdings' early days, construction sites, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and handshake deals captured in faded color. "Your grandmother Catherine was my heart," he remarked softly, pointing to a lovely woman with a bright smile standing beside him in front of their first large construction project. "When I discovered her affair after her death, it nearly destroyed me, not just the betrayal, but the fact that she'd taken the truth to her grave." "Is that why you and Dad always seemed strained, even before the financial issues?" I inquired. Grandpa nodded slowly. "I tried not to let it affect how I treated him. But perhaps some part of me was always looking for Catherine's betrayal in Edward's face. And Edward, he always sensed something was missing between us, though he never knew why." He turned the page, revealing images of my father as a young man who had graduated from college and joined the family business. I should have told him the truth when he was old enough to understand. Secrets like this poison families across generations. "Like the secret that my parents have been embezzling from the company?" I questioned, unable to hide my bitterness. "Yes," Grandpa replied. "Though I suspect that particular crime has a simpler motivation. Your father has expensive tastes, and your mother's family lost their money 2 generations ago. Her social status has always depended entirely on the Blake fortune." He closed the album softly. "But there's something else you need to understand, Clara. Edward isn't biologically a Blake, but he is my son in every way that matters. I raised him, taught him, loved him. His actions are his own responsibility. But the distance between us, that's partially my failure. The complexities of familial relationships had never seemed more profound. Grandpa William had hidden a painful secret for decades out of love, but that secret had created an emotional chasm, maybe driving my father to his own deceptions. "What happens now?" I inquired calmly. "Now we rebuild," Grandpa responded. "The company?" "Yes, but more importantly, the family, or at least the parts that can be salvaged." Before I could react, there was a quick knock on the study door. Liam entered with a concerned countenance. "You need to come downstairs," he demanded quickly. "Dad's gone through Grandpa's office. He's destroying documents." The weeks following what our family would refer to as the disclosure were some of the most difficult of my life. My parents declared total battle, both legal and emotional. They left Lakeview Manor the day after my father was spotted shredding documents, settling into their Manhattan penthouse and hiring Stanley Rothman, one of New York's most aggressive attorneys. Grandpa William, bless his heart, has temporarily moved in with Michael and me. Our humble colonial, which was usually so cozy, suddenly felt too small for his larger-than-life presence, while yet feeling strangely more at home with him there, drinking coffee at our kitchen table, and telling stories about his early days in real estate. My parents' legal onslaught began with a petition questioning Grandpa's mental competency. Despite the independent medical examination establishing his capacity, they produced testimonials from previously engaged professionals, all of which indicated that Grandpa William suffered from considerable cognitive impairment with occasional intervals of lucidity. Judge Franklin's genuine affinity with Grandpa ensured that the case was given to Judge Rebecca Martinez, who is recognized for her straightforward approach to family conflicts. She requested a thorough evaluation by a court-appointed geriatric psychiatrist, who confirmed what we already knew. Grandpa William had some age-related memory difficulties but was essentially competent in his decision-making ability. With the competency challenge defeated, my parents changed tactics. Rothman filed an emergency injunction to block any changes to the company's leadership structure, stating that my father was acting under a lawful power of attorney and that the unexpected reorganization would do irreparable injury to Blake Holdings' economic interests. Meanwhile, Sophia initiated a social media slander campaign. Carefully phrased posts about elder exploitation and manipulative relatives taking advantage of my beloved grandfather began to appear on her Instagram and Facebook pages, though she never mentioned me explicitly. Anyone who knew our family understood the ramifications. "Can you believe this?" I asked Michael one evening, showing him Sophia's most recent post, a throwback photo of her and Grandpa with the message, "Some individuals will do anything for money and power, including turning family members against each other. He is broken, but he remains strong for you, Grandpa." Michael put aside the essays he was grading to read the post, his expression deepening. "She's playing the victim while your parents were the ones stealing millions. The irony is almost impressive." The toll on our marriage was subtle but significant. Michael had always been my anchor, but the continual stress of court processes, emergency business meetings, and family drama was straining both of our patience in ways I never imagined possible. Late nights looking over firm financial information resulted in less time together. The emotional burden I took home with me every day generated a gravity that was difficult to shake, even in our most personal times. "I'm sorry," I said quietly one night after shouting at him about something trivial, a missed grocery item, if I recall correctly. "I don't mean to bring all this home with me." "Hey," he said, drawing me into his arms. "For better or worse, remember? This is the worst part. We'll get through it." Liam shocked everyone with how quickly he adapted to his new role at the company. While I concentrated on operations and development, he oversaw investor relations and marketing, where his inherent charisma and ingenuity proved unexpectedly useful. He returned from Los Angeles, took an apartment near the office, and threw himself into understanding the company with a zeal I'd never seen him show for anything other than music. "It turns out I'm pretty good at this corporate stuff," he informed me during lunch in the company cafeteria, about a month after the epiphany. Who knew? Explaining complex real estate investments to nervous investors isn't that different from convincing club owners to book an unknown band. His assistance became even more important once the judicial proceedings began in earnest. The first injunction had been denied, but my parents' counsel had launched a more serious lawsuit contesting the new trust arrangement on a number of grounds. Each hearing revealed more family secrets in the antiseptic confines of the courtroom, with court reporters dispassionately documenting every sad detail. The larger community's reaction to the Blake family conflict was varied. Some longtime business acquaintances removed themselves, uneasy about the charges of financial misconduct. Others, particularly those who had witnessed my father's ruthless business practices firsthand, appeared almost vindicated by his demise. Extended family members took sides, with the majority of my mother's relatives predictably backing my parents and Grandpa William's few surviving relatives rallying behind him. Holiday gatherings, traditionally obligatory if not very warm, were now entirely divided by competing invitations and conspicuous omissions. Throughout it all, Grandpa William maintained an extraordinary level of decorum. Despite the public revelation of his wife's infidelity, his son's treachery, and his personal decision to keep the truth hidden for decades, he never expressed embarrassment or animosity. He testified when necessary, answered questions truthfully, and refused to engage in the emotional mudslinging that my parents had encouraged. "The truth doesn't need embellishment or defensive anger," he informed me one evening as we were reviewing case paperwork at my dining room table. "It simply needs to be stated clearly and consistently." About 6 weeks into the legal processes, I was working late at the office when I received a text message from an unknown number. It was a snapshot of a journal page in my mother's distinctive handwriting from over 30 years ago. "William confronted me today about the Westlake project estimates. He senses something is wrong, but he doesn't realize how serious it is, or how long Edward has been manipulating the books. I convinced him that it was an accounting error. He still trusts me, albeit less than previously. Edward believes we should accelerate the strategy. I'm terrified of what that entails." The written message that accompanied the photo simply stated, "There's more where this came from. Meet me in Riverside Park on the bench near the 79th Street boat basin. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone." I gazed at my phone, my heart pounding. This was proof that the financial manipulation had been going on much longer than Grandpa suspected, but it could also be a trap of some sort. After talking with our attorneys and Grandpa William, I consented to the meeting with safety safeguards in place. Liam would be nearby, watching from a distance, while our private investigator would be positioned with a clear view of the location. The next day, clad in a wool coat to combat the November weather, I sat on the allocated bench overlooking the Hudson River. At exactly 2 p.m., a figure in a hooded jacket approached and sat next to me. When they lowered the hood, my mouth practically hit the floor. Helena, my mother's personal assistant, had worked for our family for more than 20 years. "I don't have much time," she remarked, her German accent stronger than normal, indicating urgency. "Your mother would fire me immediately if she knew I was here." "Why are you doing this?" I inquired. Helena gazed out over the ocean, her profile stark against the gray sky. "I have respected your Grandpa William for many years. What your parents are doing, it's not right. I've watched. Said nothing for too long." She handed me a little present wrapped in plain brown paper. "Your mother's diaries. 3 of them, spanning 25 years. She thinks they're locked in her personal safe, but I've had copies of her keys for emergencies." She immediately left the room. "I was never here. You never saw me." Before I could thank her, she was walking away quickly, vanishing among the other park guests. The journals proved to be combustible. My mother had methodically documented years of financial deception, which began tiny but became increasingly brazen as my father took control of the company. There were references to offshore accounts, faked estimates, and even plain fraud in dealings with investors. More upsetting were the casual comments to me and my siblings. Liam was written off as hopeless for business reasons. I was described as too principled for her own good, just like William. Sophia was described as absolutely malleable. She'll sign whatever Edward puts in front of her as long as she receives her allowance and attention. After our counsel produced the diaries in court, the judge demanded forensic authentication. Once recognized as authentic, they basically dismissed my parents' case. The evidence for long-term, purposeful financial crimes was overwhelming. However, just when we appeared to be winning the legal struggle, a more unsettling reality surfaced. Working with forensic accountants, we determined that almost $2 million had simply vanished, having been routed through so many shell companies and fronts that tracing it became nearly impossible. The money had practically disappeared into the intricate web of international banking. After a particularly exhausting day of financial research, I got home to find Michael waiting with a nice bottle of wine and takeout from our favorite Italian restaurant. "You need a break," he stated firmly, taking my briefcase and placing it aside. "Just one evening without Blake family drama." We were about halfway through supper when my phone rang. When I saw Liam's number, I apologized and answered. "Mandy," he murmured, sounding apprehensive. "Dad just called me. He wants to meet alone." My fork clattered against the plate. "He wants to meet you? Why?" "I don't know, he just said he wants to talk to explain some things. I think I should go. Liam gave a pause. Maybe he's finally ready to explain himself. Or maybe he's trying to divide us, I argued. That's always been their strategy, play us against each other. I know, Liam sighed. But he's still our father, Mandy. Biological or not. Don't you want to understand why he did all this? The question impacted me harder than I anticipated. Did I wish to understand? Part of me desired simply justice, consequences, and closure. However, another part, the daughter who had once admired her father despite his flaws, was anxious for explanations that might make sense of the betrayal. If you go, I finally responded, I'm coming with you. The meeting never occurred. The next morning, we learned that my father had boarded a private plane heading for a country without an extradition treaty with the United States. When questioned by the authorities, my mother claimed ignorance of his plans, but few believed her. The official inquiry into Blake Holdings' finances had now progressed from civil to criminal, with the FBI taking a direct interest in the matter. In the midst of all the pandemonium, a minor miracle occurred. During a typical doctor's appointment, I discovered that I was 8 weeks pregnant. Michael and I had been trying for almost a year, and the timing seemed both dreadful and totally wonderful. New life is sprouting from the ashes of our family's destruction. When I told Grandpa William the news, his eyes welled up with tears, the first I had seen since the tragedy began. Life goes on, he murmured quietly, resting his aged palm on mine. That's the beauty of it. 1 year after Grandpa William stood up in the library and altered everything, we regrouped at Lakeview Manor. Not for a reading or a court hearing, but for a different type of family gathering. The big home seemed strange now. We'd taken down some of my mother's more extravagant artwork and opened up rooms that had long been blocked off, bringing light into regions that had been dark for years. My father remained abroad, allegedly living in a home in a country known for harboring affluent fugitives. The FBI had frozen many of his known assets, but we all felt he had meticulously planned his escape, hiding resources in places where they couldn't be easily tracked. My mother had worked out a deal with prosecutors, offering to collaborate in exchange for avoiding jail time. She now lived in a small apartment in Boston, having abandoned any pretense of social significance. Sophia had undergone the most amazing shift. After initially agreeing with our parents, she looked to have a genuine crisis of conscience. When federal investigators showed her the actual paperwork she had signed, which implicated her in potential felonies, the reality of her predicament broke through the protective bubble our parents had built around her. I didn't understand what I was doing, she told me emotionally during a difficult talk 6 months ago. Dad always said it was just aggressive tax planning, that everyone in our position did the same things. Sophia, I'd said, not rudely but firmly. At some point you have to take responsibility for your own choices. That talk signaled the start of a tentative reconciliation. Sophia had begun therapy, moved out of the luxurious apartment our parents had supplied, and accepted a respectable position in the company's philanthropic foundation, work that appeared to genuinely engage her abilities and interests. Now, as we sat around the dining table, Grandpa William at the head, Liam, Sophia, Michael and myself arrayed around him, there was a cautious optimism that would have been unthinkable a year before. My 3-month-old son Noah slept calmly in a bassinet near my chair, his presence a continuous reminder of life's resilience in the face of adversity. I've asked you all here because I've made a decision about Lakeview Manor, Grandpa William said after we completed our meal. I'm selling it. The statement, delivered without prelude, startled everyone into quiet. But this is the family home, Sophia objected. It's been in the Blake family for 3 generations. Grandpa nodded. Exactly. And it carries the weight of 3 generations of secrets, lies, and unhappiness. This house shaped all of us, and not always for the better. He scanned the table, his eyes lingering on each of us. The Blake legacy isn't this house or even the company. It's what we build together moving forward, and I think we need fresh ground to build on. Over dessert, he revealed design plans for 3 nearby villas on a stunning plot of property overlooking the same lake from the opposite shore. 3 homes, one for Grandpa William, one for Michael and myself and our growing family, and one for Liam, who had recently gotten engaged to a bright environmental lawyer he met through the company's sustainable development projects. What about me? Sophia inquired quietly, realizing there were only 3 dwellings planned. Grandpa William regarded her intently. That depends on you, Sophia. Your probationary period with the foundation ends next month. The reports I've received suggest you found your calling there. If you choose to stay with the family and continue your current path, we'll build a fourth home. Or perhaps you'd prefer your own space elsewhere. The choice is yours. Sophia nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. I'd like to stay close to Noah. I want to be a real aunt to him, not the kind of aunt our mother was to our cousins, sending expensive gifts but never really present. The business has stabilized under our joint leadership. Blake Holdings had weathered the crisis with amazingly minimal long-term damage, thanks in large part to our honesty with investors and partners about what had happened and the reforms we had put in place to prevent similar situations in the future. We had shrunk certain activities, sold off assets with emotional connotations, and refocused on the community-oriented development that Grandpa William had originally envisioned. Liam had found surprising fulfillment in his business career, while he continued to perform music on weekends at a local jazz club. Michael had continued to teach, but he had reduced his schedule so that he could be more there for Noah and help me during the transitions. And I'd discovered strengths I hadn't realized I possessed, the ability to make difficult decisions, lead through crisis, and restore what had been broken. Later that evening, Grandpa William and I stood on the terrace overlooking the lake, watching the sunset paint the water in golden crimson. Do you regret it? I questioned him. Revealing everything, it would have been easier to let it go, to preserve the family image. He pondered the topic, his old hands resting on the stone balustrade. Easier in the short term perhaps. But secrets don't disappear. They metastasize. Your father's dishonesty grew from the soil of my own deception about his parentage. Your mother's manipulations flourished in the shadows we all agreed not to illuminate. He gave a wink. No, Clara. Truth is always worth the pain it causes. He returned his attention to the home, where Michael was teaching Liam how to properly handle Noah. Besides, look what has emerged from the wreckage. Something authentic. Something with a foundation built on honesty rather than appearances. The next spring we broke ground on the new properties. The ceremony was simple, just the five of us and Noah, who was now crawling and babbling with excitement. Sophia had truly earned her position back in the family circle, her work with the foundation demonstrating true promise, and her friendship with Liam and myself, a genuine physical bond. Grandpa William insisted that we all turn a shovelful of earth, including Noah, whose small hands I guided around the handle of a miniature shovel. New foundations, Grandpa exclaimed, watching his great-grandson with delight. That's what matters in the end. As I reflect on this wild journey from complete betrayal to hesitant, beautiful redemption, I can't help but wonder about your personal experiences with family justice. Has karma ever made its way into your family history, delivering a moment of truth when you least expect it? Whether it was a spectacular showdown like ours, or a calm, life-changing discovery, I'd love to hear your story in the comments section below. Because family is complicated, messy, and often devastating. But as my grandfather taught me, the truth is always worth fighting for, even if it cuts deeply.